Namaste. Good morning to all our friends in Washington and New York. Good afternoon to our friends in Europe, and of course, good evening in India, and late good evening to our friends in Taiwan, in Australia, in Japan. So today we are going to discuss the disappearing victims of Chinese colonialism. The reason why we are discussing today this subject is that today is the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearance, which is observed under the aegis of United Nations, because this is a very serious problem which people and nations, especially those nations who have been under occupation or under dictatorship, they have been facing that under the dictatorial rule or colonial rule. It's a very common practice that those people who are who are speaking up for justice, they become inconvenient to the powers of the day. And the end result is that many of them are picked up and then nobody knows about them. We have so many cases in hundreds from across the world, and unfortunately the numbers are highest in those places where colonialism is still in practice or dictatorship is in practice, especially China, which is occupying so many countries, especially Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, Hong Kong, and they have their eyes on other countries which are free, like Taiwan, whom they want to convert into a colony like Tibet or South Mongolia or East Turkestan. So today, this subject, we will have guests from three colonies of China. One is Tibet, then East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia. And I will introduce to our panelists. And before that, I'll give a short introduction of the two organizations who are organizers of today's webinar. This webinar, we are running a series since April, last year, April, and this will be the 17th webinar in that series. Uh, the organizers are Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, which is CHASE. CHASE is a think tank, as you know, which is focused on understanding issues which are impacting countries and societies in and around Himalayan Asia region. It's a platform for exchange of knowledge, views, and perspectives among Indian and international experts, researchers, writers, advocacy groups who take keen interest on various aspects of political, social, economic, and strategic developments in this region. The other organizer of this series of webinars is Tibetan Youth Congress, which is a worldwide organization of Tibetan diaspora, and it has a history of 50 years now. It stands for the common struggle of Tibetan people for the restoration of complete independence of whole of Tibet. And over these years, TYC has evolved as the largest and most active, non-violent, and non-government organization of Tibetan diaspora. So it has emerged as the nursery of social, political, cultural leadership and talent among the Tibetans. So when we welcome all of you, I will introduce today's speakers. We have Nurgul Sawut. She is a very prominent Uyghur leader who operates from Canberra in Australia. Currently, she is the executive chairperson of Uyghur Freedom Forum. In 2019-20, she was a member of the board director of Washington DC-based Campaign for Uyghurs. By profession, she is a therapist. She's a community leader and a frontline human rights activist. So before coming to Australia for advanced studies in 2000, she had her Bachelor of Economics from Nankai University in China and business management major in 1997. She worked in various central government departments of Chinese government in Beijing before she went to Australia in 2000. So she has been outspoken on China's atrocities against Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim communities in East Turkestan, which China claims to be as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region after occupying it illegally. So Nurgul has participated in many campaign networks which have focused on disappearance of Uyghur citizens under the Chinese rule, ending of Uyghur forced labor, ending forced organ harvest by the Chinese police, Chinese army, and promotion of democracy. So we have our another participant. He is from South Mongolia, Mr. Engebatu Togochog. He is the director of the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center, which is based in New York. He operates from there, and he is dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights of the Mongolian people in Chinese occupied Southern Mongolia. Uh, Ingebatu is the editor-in-chief of SMHRIC organizational newsletter, which is titled as Southern Mongolia Watch, which is published in English, Japanese, Chinese, and Mongolian. He speaks and writes in all those languages, so understands the Chinese mind and the audience across the world. So, Mr. Ongebatu, he was born in southern Mongolia in 1972 and came to the United States in 1998. So since then, he has been very actively working for the freedom of southern Mongolia, and he has presented the southern Mongolian case in many forums like the UN Human Rights Council, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and UN Forum on Minority Issues, US Congress, European Parliament, Scottish Parliament, and many other forums. So, welcome, Ingebatu, once again to this forum. And we have another star from the Tibetan community, Rinzen Chodon. Rinzen Chodon, she is the National Director of Students for a Free Tibet, which is called SFT, India. And I know her since long. She a very energetic young face of Tibetan youth movement. She has worked with many youth groups and a network of youths activists, and for those groups which stand for non-violence and effective action for Tibet to see its freedom, total freedom from Chinese occupation. Students for Free Tibet has a tradition of activism, and it works among university students. So this organization has played a very impressive role, especially when it comes to reaching out to the youths, whether it is in India or other countries. SFT is very active across the world in universities. So, welcome, Rinzin Choron, today to this show. So, now we start our today's discussion. After all our three experts have made their presentations, we will have questions in our chat box. Please send your questions, and we'll try to pick up as many as possible and ask. If you have a special expert to ask, please do. Otherwise, we'll see who is the best to answer that question. So let us start with Nurgul Savut, who will be presenting the case of enforced disappearance in East Turkestan, which China calls Xinjiang. So, Nurgul, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar and commemoration of International Day of the Victim of Enforced Disappearance. It is something UN has decided to commemorate many years ago. but it doesn't matter how long ago it was decided to commemorate or decide to have 30th of August is the Remembrance Day. But the most important of all is what message we would like to give to outside, what message we would like to take as our guidelines, and we work on it. And when I really checked out UN website and what actually Secretary General Antonio Guterres it's actually stated about victim of enforced disappearances, his message was very clear. It's when I read it, it resonates so much with our situation in East Turkestan, as well as the anguish and the pain what our people actually going through in the diaspora. Here we go. That's what he said. Impunity compound the suffering and anguish. Under the international human rights law, the families and the societies have a right to know the truth about what happened. I call all member states to fulfill this responsibility. It's clearly from Antonio's the message. I can 100% assure you, China did not fulfill their responsibility. And enforced disappearance, in our case, it's happening for quite some time. It's happening for quite some time because it's the instrument used and applied for terrorizing our people and a community, and going through this mass detention, mass internment, and also disappearance too. And when the enforced disappearance or forced disappearance first occurred, which is, I shouldn't say the first occurred, it happened in the past, but there's a significant part and what we actually remember, and also we can track back. It's very much connected to what's happening to us is 2009. When there's a 5th of July, after 5th July Urumqi massacre, we have thousands of young men all being arrested and disappeared. And many families for years and years are trying to look for their loved ones. What happened here is, at a time, many families been silenced. Either they've been removed or to rural areas away from the public eyes, or they simply got arrested, or they're threatened. Whichever way the Chinese authority used the method they applied at the time, the majority of them managed to keep us silent and stay silent. What happened? There was a one famous case, but the mother of a 20 years old young man at the time, she never actually kept her silence. Her name is Patagul Ghulam, and this mother noticed her son never came back, returned home on the 5th of July, after the clash, after the mass arrest in Urumqi. And after, she asked, and the local government and Urumqi city, district, the police stations, every single person telling her exactly the same message: we don't know. And she never gave up. She kept pushing and pushing. She's been threatened. She's been, told to, keep quiet or silent, or go back to your county town. Even, well, she never stopped. She even traveled all the way to Beijing to appeal to central government. That she never heard anything, or she didn't never get anything, any piece of information about her son. Tragically, in 2014, she got arrested. In the meantime, between 2009 and 2014, those 5 years, she has spoken many medias. She never ever afraid to speak to the international medias. She's been interviewed and she's given many opportunity in international, the major medias, talk about her son, talk about her own experience, what happened to her son, what happened to herself. And eventually, when she got arrested in 2014, when we have the mass internment start in 2016, and she was sentenced. And sentenced, she was given a life imprisonment. Her crime was just very simple, one message. She was looking for her son. And many sympathetic Uyghur scholars, or someone who's doing research on Uyghur culture, history, and or anthropologists, what they find is that this is such cruel a treatment towards the mother who's actually willingly spending her 5-6 years of life to look for her own son. So they write a statement and petition, and are trying to raise awareness internationally. And basically, this message is well received by Chinese foreign ministry. However, we still, until now, we don't know where's Particle Ghulam actually kept, and where she's imprisoned. And so does so many other people. There's so over a million people who is taken into camp, and no one actually know where they kept. Some of them, of course, they've been released or taken into different factories as a forced labor. But the communication between them and their family is completely cut off. Now, there's a raise another new question for us. Can we consider them as the forced disappearance? We may not, and people may claim, say, oh no, you still know they're alive. Yes, we know they're alive. But don't forget, their rights to live, rights to speak, rights to have a connection with their families and communities all taken away. So now we have to really raise this big question about victim of enforcement disappearance and under the Human Rights Convention. And how do we classify people who's in the camp? We don't even know. We as a community, we've been in this journey for 5 years. And many families, they're still looking for their loved ones. And in our case, the famous case is, and we have 386 the Uyghur scholars actually disappeared since April 2017. The latest update was on that number is 21st of May 2019. And the very small numbers of those intellectuals are being released as a symbolic, as and doing good favor, a goodwill to the international community under the pressure, but majority of them still went missing. And how do we classify them? And the families and the children of those intellectuals, they're still looking for, as a community, we are still looking for them. And as a result of over a million people who's in the camp, we have nearly million children, which is 900, the international report recorded as 950,000 children or displaced, as well as are taken into state-run schools or the orphanage. And how do we classify them? And some of the children who parents actually end up in the overseas, and the children end up in the back home, the families are completely fallen apart, and those children simply evaporated, simply disappeared. And the parents who actually living overseas never be able to hear, never be able to find those children. And they're still living in anguish, they're still going through that grieving, they still cannot close that chapter. And the three bigger major, the future of those forced disappearances. One is victim themselves, right? Victim themselves is more likely unable to communicate with their family members and their friends, and they couldn't tell their stories, what's happening about them, and are far away from the a prisoner of protective law, which means there's no justice in their case, and live constantly in a fear. So then the second one is friends and the family members of those victims, and they live in anguish and emotional upheaval, not knowing whether their loved ones are alive or dead, can't close that unknown chapter. And even in some death cases, they can't even issue death certificate for their loved ones. They can't even have the funeral. And then the third part is community. And the community is of enforced disappearance is very much in goes through that a collective grievance, collective loss. And it's not just a loss, it's actually there's a financial economic part of the loss as well. And community members of those who are lost or the family members disappeared is marginalized. And in our case, those, as a community as a large, what we actually went through is forced disappearance used as the instrument of terror in our case, because China just want to fear, just want to terrorize whole community. That's why they come up with this big decision. They come up with this brilliant idea to mass arrest, mass internment of our community members at the age between and as young as a 14 all the way to 65. And in some cases, we even have older people as old as 78. So I really want to just touch on those 3 points here. We've been affected by in every level, and it doesn't matter in individual, the victims. Victims cannot tell their own stories. We don't even know and their condition, what's happening to them. The family members, they're still going through the grief. And I would like to share one point in here. As a part of devastation, now recently our community in the diaspora, we start recording the numbers of suicidal cases amongst the females. And we have in 1 month, there's over 1,000 a case actually occurred. For one ethnicity, one community, over 1,000 female aged between 25 or less than 40 taking their own lives. That's unusual. That's a tragic story. And this story has to be told. And one commonality of those suicidal cases is the husband has been disappeared more than 5 years or 5 years. And they lost the hope. They could not see the hope the husband's going to return home. They could not see they're ever going to rejoin. And I would like to run one more part of this whole process. Our agony, our pain is not over yet. And as you know, Xi Jinping just recently visited our homeland. He actually quite, openly celebrating how successful he actually completed stage 1 of massacre. Now, stage 2, it's kickstarted. And zero COVID policy is a very good key, very good instrument. There's many people actually, we are hearing daily basis, no food, no a decent nutritional, the actual, the food for children, and we're not even talking about adults here. And the people are starving, crying out for help. And if they go at, the break the rule, they got arrested. They will be taken in. So you have a really hard rock situation here. Do you want to stay at home, decide to die, or do you want to go out, get arrested, and go into the camp? So that's your choice. Either of them is good one. And pretty much you have to pick and choose the better of two evils. So people decided to stay at home. But that was agonizing 20, more than 20 years, 20 days now. So it's going to keep going. It is going to continue. We can feel it. And the community is in a pain. Now, until now, our community in a diaspora, we managed to record as much as we can all this disappearing or missing people and in our database. However, those disappearance cases never ever been recorded in UN databases. But when I check UN databases, on their websites, there's a plenty cases from South America. There's a plenty case from different parts of the world. And my big question to UN, Human Rights Commission, as well as the people who are managing or pretty much looking after that database of victims of enforced disappearance. Why can't you record Uyghur people? I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurgul. It's a very heart touching description you have given the the state of how the victims disappear and what happens to the families who are suffering. uh, Far more than that, but more than that, what is touching, and I think what the international community should take notice of, is number one, the as you explained, how Xi Jinping, his Communist Party regime, is going scot free with all these crimes. And
Yes.
worse than that is, as you described, the role of United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
United Nations claims to be the champion of the parent of human rights of those people who can't, who are at the receiving end. And unfortunately, the role of United Nations has been, if I can use the term, shameful. So thank you very much for making this presentation about what the people of occupied East Turkestan, what China calls Xinjiang, they are facing at the hands of the colonial rulers from Beijing. Thank you very much. So now
Thank
may
you.
I request our friend from southern Mongolia, Mr. Engebatu Togochog, to please make your presentation about what is happening in southern Mongolia under Chinese colonialism.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to thank Mr. Vijay Kranti and your colleagues from the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement for organizing this very special webinar to mark the United Nations International Day of the Victims of enforced disappearance and providing me an opportunity to highlight the Chinese colonial regime's enforced disappearance in southern Mongolia. Um, the United Nations International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Article 1 says no one shall be subject to enforced disappearance, and Article 2 Article 2 defined the enforced disappearance as this. The enforced disappearance is considered to be the arrest, detention, abduction, or any other form of deprivation of liberty by agents of the state or by persons or groups of persons acting with the authorization, support, or acquiescence of the state, followed by a refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of liberty or by concealment of the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person, which place such a person outside the protection of the law. So, in light of this convention and other internationally accepted standards and on human on enforced disappearance. Here, I would like to bring to your attention some of the most prominent cases of enforced disappearance of Mongolian dissidents, activists, writers, students, and ordinary herders in southern Mongolia. The first is the case of Mr. Hada and his family members. Mr. Hada was arrested in 1995 and sentenced to 15 years in jail in 1996 by the Chinese authorities on charges of splitting the country and engaging in espionage. He had served his full sentence terms in Inner Mongolia Jail number 4 in Chifeng City. According to the Chinese criminal law, Mr. Hada should be freed on December 10th, 2010, upon completion of his upon completion of his 15 years jail term. Not only did the Chinese authorities refuse to free him, but also they arrested and detained his family members, including his wife, Mrs. Shina, and his son, Mr. Willis, a week before Hada's expected release date. Instead of being released, Hada was secretly transferred to the autonomous region capital Hohhot and held in a secret prison for another 4 years without any legal justification. After these 4 years of extrajudicial detention, he was placed under house arrest in an apartment owned and run by the Chinese state security authorities. The Chinese state security personnel guarded him around the clock. He had no freedom of movement, no freedom of communication. After the 2020 large-scale protests in southern Mongolia, Mr. Hada has completely disappeared. His health condition and whereabouts are unknown today, and his family members have also been subject to frequent harassment and enforced disappearance after about the 2 year long extrajudicial detention. His wife Shina was sentenced to 3 years in jail with a 5 years reprieve on a trumped up charge of engaging in illegal business, which is referring to her Mongolian bookstore. And their son Willis was imprisoned for 3 years in juvenile prison on trumped up charges of robbery and detained for another year, another trumped up charge of drug possession. And both mother and son were placed under what is called the residential surveillance, which is a form of house arrest. They were denied the right to liberty, right to movement, right to communication, and the right to employment. After 2020 protest, the entire family has gone missing, and their whereabouts and health conditions remain unknown. The second case I would like to bring to your attention is the case of Mrs. Ho Chung Hu, a human rights activist and dissident writer. She was arrested in November 2010 by the Chinese authorities for rallying the Mongolians through the internet to cheer for Mr. Hada's scheduled release. And since then, she was disappeared. And in 2016, we learned that Mrs. At the age of 61 in a hospital closely guarded by the Chinese state security authorities until her last breath. At her deathbed, she had been monitored and guarded by the Chinese state security personnel around the clock for her possible threat to the national interest and state security of China. Hocho's son and only family member, Mr. Chol Borjgin, also died of brain cancer in the United States few months after her death. As an outspoken critic of the Chinese government, returning Southern Mongolia to visit his mother was totally impossible for Chol. So his multiple requests to the Chinese government to allow his to allow his mother to come to the United States for medical treatment have been completely denied. And the third case is the case of Mr. Satmangol, an indigenous right activist and cyber dissident who was arrested at the Beijing Capital International Airport on April 2010 by the Chinese authorities as he was departing China to attend the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues ninth session in New York. Um, at the request from UN Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Dr. James Anaya's request on the case, the Chinese government responded in a letter stating that South Mongol engaged in counterfeiting book registration numbers and illegally publishing and selling books, and is suspected of being involved in illegal crimes. On April 20, 2010, he was arrested and detained by Liaoning Chaoyang Public Security Office. His case is currently being tried. That's what the Chinese government responded. It's been almost 12 years since his disappearance. His whereabouts, health condition, and the outcome of the trial remain unknown. So, after 7-decade-long genocide, ethnic cleansing, political repression, economic exploitation, cultural assimilation, and environmental destruction, in 2020, the government of China targeted the Southern Mongolians' last defense of national identity, that is, language. A new policy called the Second Generation Bilingual Education was implemented in language, culture, and identity from Southern Mongolia. In response to this new round of cultural genocide, the entire Southern Mongolian population stood up. Hundreds of thousands of students took to the streets, and millions of parents and teachers launched the total school boycott. Of course, the Chinese government responded with a heavy-handed crackdown. We estimate more than 10,000 Southern Mongolians were arrested, detained, imprisoned, and placed under house arrest. Following this crackdown, what the Chinese governments are carrying out today is a region-wide intensive training program called the Training for the Firm Inculcation of Chinese Nationality Common Identity. Spoken of speak Chinese and become a civilized person. The entire Mongolian population, including students, teachers, government officials, even party members and ordinary herders, are subjected to this training to discard the so called narrow nationalistic identity and become a civilized member of Chinese nationality. Those Mongolians who refuse to accept the so-called Chinese nationality common identity are subjected to the to enforced disappearance. An individual who is currently under house arrest in southern Mongolia told us through a confidential channel that tens of thousands of young southern Mongolians have disappeared recently for speaking up for their right to mother tongue. This is what's happening in southern Mongolia today. China is a signatory of a number of international human rights conventions, including the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The international community and the United Nations must hold China accountable for her atrocities, including enforced disappearance committed in her occupied nations of southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Engebatu, for describing what is happening in southern Mongolia today. Not today only, but since last more than 70 years, what is happening. And especially, one although there were many common issues which Eastern Turkestan, Tibet, and Southern Mongolia are facing, uh, one issue which you pointed out is the existence of what the concept of house arrest, and that too at not one a person's house, his own or her own house, but in designated houses which are guarded by Chinese police and Chinese army. This is a very serious issue which needs to be discussed very seriously. The existence of private jails in China is a very common practice of the Chinese Communist Party. This has happened in Tibet very extensively. It has happened in Xinjiang, in East Turkestan, and is happening in southern Mongolia. These jails, even the Chinese citizens who are not colonized people, who are the children of the Chinese nation itself, whom the Chinese Communist Party is claiming to represent, even thousands of those Chinese are now languishing in such houses which are nowhere documented, even as residential places, or they are even not documented as official places for keeping people on hold, like a sub jail or a police station. And there are many houses which are existing, which are used as private jails. So this is a very serious issue which I think the international community, especially the United Nations, in case United Nations has the guts to stand up and speak up, because unfortunately United Nations has lost it miserably uh, in last few years, and China has practically occupied various institutions of United Nations. So thank you very much for pointing out how this enforced disappearance of people is being practiced by the Chinese Communist Party in southern Mongolia. Um, Now we come to the case of Tibet. As you all know, and we all know, most of these crimes, whether it is forced disappearance or use of intern camps or use of language as a tool of communism, of colonialism, these arts have been refined in Tibet in last 7 years by the Chinese Communist Party, and now many of these fine arts are being practiced in other colonies like southern Mongolia or East Turkestan, and even being practiced in Hong Kong. This is very tragic that a regime, Communist Party regime of China, you know, first develops various tools of torture and exploitation in one colony, and then uses them in other. Anyhow, now I will request Rinjin Chodan, who represents Students for Free Tibet, which is a very active organization reaching out to youths of the world, especially those youths who are in universities. So, Rinjin Chodan, please.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having me and giving me this opportunity to be part of this really important discussion along with our allies here from Southern Mongolia and East Turkestan. The fact that we are having this particular discussion is something that I personally believe is also a form of protest and a sign of resilience against the Chinese Communist government, because the fact that uh, Chinese Communist government has been trying for years and years to eradicate the very identity of Tibet, and similarly, what Vijay Krantiji sir said earlier, Tibet has been the experimental hotspot where all this level of tortures and tactics have been experimented upon. And while listening to earlier speakers, I could relate and could feel the anguish, and uh, something that also made me realize this also what's happening inside Tibet. Uh, as someone who's been working closely within the Tibetan freedom movement, we have seen that there's been now a change or shift in Chinese political kind of propaganda or policy. They are now targeting Tibetan influence, people with influence, people who are writers, uh, who have been working within the community, who have really good sort of understanding of the language. For example, I would like to give the recent arrest and sentencing of one very eminent scholar, Gosharat Gyatso. He was sentenced to 10 years of unjust imprisonment. And his crime, so-called crime, being vocal enough to say that there's need to protect Tibetan language and culture. And just for saying that and being vocal, he was sentenced to 10 years. Right now, if we particularly talk about something that's very relevant with today's day, which is International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearance, we have one of the most high-profile cases, which is the 11th Pension Lama, Gendu Chöki Nyima. He's one of the youngest political prisoner. It's been more than now 27 years. Still, we don't know about his condition. He was arrested at the age of 6, along with his whole family members, right after he was recognized as the reincarnation of 10 Panchen Lama. And like him, there are thousands and hundreds of other political prisoners who are currently languishing and suffering under Chinese brutal uh, torture and in Chinese prisons. So that's why I think it's extremely important for people like us and have build this allyship. So I feel really privileged that I get to share the stage with my fellow friends who are who have the same target. We are fighting for freedom. We are fighting for justice. And to bring it into your attention, we have seen there has been like continuous arrests and sentencing of Tibetans over the last couple of months. To give you some of the names, we have Thupten Lodrila, we have Tenzi Chembela, we have Dil Al Hadin. These are all prominent people. For example, Tenzi Chembela is Tibetan entrepreneur and philanthropist, and he was sentenced to 18 years. And so-called, charges that he was the trumped-up charges that he received is inciting separatism. So these are some of the cases. And then uh, earlier when one of our speaker also shared that they are now targeting the Tibetan, the very essence of one's identity, which is language. So we have seen that under Chinese brutal policies, they are now targeting the three pillars of Tibetan identity: Tibetan language, Tibetan religion, and Tibetan way of life. When we talk about language, we have seen, I think one of the speaker also earlier shared, the state-run colonial boarding schools, which is something that I personally believe that we all should do something about this, because this proves that China is now trying to eradicate or exterminate the very identity of the younger generations. They are being forced to stay away from their families, uh, obviously ripping away from the learning their own language. And what we got to know from the sources inside Tibet, that in these colonial run state run schools, they are taught in Tibetan language. There's this massive uh, Chinese propaganda indoctrination happening. And then we have received, as per the report by Indian Tibet Action Institute, there are almost 800 to 900,000 Tibetan children being forced to live away from their family and are kept in these colonial schools. And then these are like only numbers which are restricted to age 6 to 18. Uh, it doesn't include children who are from 5 to 6 years of age. There are also like pre boarding school sort of thing that they have created. So that's why it's really it's a huge threat against the Tibetan culture, language, and the very identity of being a Tibet. So that's something that's been happening, and we all know that under the dictatorial Chinese communist regime, Tibet has been turned into this largest open air prison. And we all know for a fact that Tibet has been recently ranked as the least free country in the world. Now, keeping all these aspects into mind, I think, as our two speakers earlier said, we should hold China accountable for all these atrocities, especially UN, and at the same time, international community must come together. And I think at this very point of time, allyship like ours, like the countries who are currently colonized by Chinese communist regime, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, East Turkestan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, I think we can achieve a lot if we all come together. And we have seen it happening. There's been collaborative works and action which has proved to be successful. I will give you the example of the recent 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics campaign that we all came together as one, and there's been huge uproar and anger and reaction from the Chinese Communist government, which clearly shows that whatever we have been doing has been proving and being successful as well. So I end my note here and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Injin Chodan, for presenting the Tibetan case in a nutshell and in a very impressive way, the way you have explained how China is trying to destroy all the three pillars: the language, the religion, the social life. And this, unfortunately, is happening in other colonies also. This has happened very extensively in East Turkestan, Xinjiang. It is happening since, I think, the longest one in southern Mongolia. And China is now trying to, uh, I would say, solve this problem, what they call solving a problem. Uh, they have been in occupation of at least East Turkestan and Tibet for more than 70 years. And then uh, almost, or maybe more than, yeah, more than 100 years, they have occupied southern Mongolia. And all this period, if Xi Jinping comes to either to Beijing or to Urumqi or to southern Mongolia and claims that we will work through unifying the nation, it clearly shows that all their attempts of colonizing the people uh, have not succeeded. Especially colonizing the minds have not succeeded so far. But the way now Chinese government, especially this communist government led by President Xi Jinping, the campaign which it is running to colonize the minds of the colonized people, the way they are organizing intern camps in East Turkestan, the way they are organizing special schools which are run by Communist Party of China, where the children of Uyghur families, of Mongol families, of Tibetan families are forcibly plucked out. The children are, even when parents are not willing, but those children are taken away forcibly to put in these schools, and those schools which are again like internment camps, like jails, from where children cannot come back to visit their home. So they are kept away from their families, they are kept away from their language, they are kept away from their social life, they are kept away from their religion, and they are bombarded day and night with communist propaganda. So this is exactly what Xi Jinping is trying to bring up the new generation of these colonized nations as people with their faces, very much Uyghur faces, very much Tibetan faces, very much Mongol faces, but their brains are programmed by Chinese Communist Party. This is one of the atrocities which is being committed by Chinese Communist Party in broad daylight, in the knowledge of the whole world. And unfortunately, we feel very sad and ashamed that most of the governments are not raising voice against it. The institutions of United Nations who took over as the parentage of human rights, of the social life, of free values of human society, and United Nations itself has ceased to be the custodian. So that is a very unfortunate situation. And now we are coming to the last session, which is question answer sessions. This session would have been held by our colleague, Dr. Professor Ayushi Ketkar. She, because of health reasons, she has undergone some surgery, so she's recovering from there. I'm sure she will be with us in our next webinar. So I will handle this responsibility on behalf of Professor Ayushi Ketkar. So one question is for Nurgul Sawut. You know, something which people are noticing. In the morning I was discussing with a friend, and she raised this issue that it is very strange that Muslim nations, who claim of, whatever claims they make of as uh, as religious institutions or governments claiming to be more Muslim than others, they watch what is happening to the Muslims in East Turkestan, the way the mosques have been demolished, the way children have been barred from, newborn children barred from being given name of Ali or Muhammad and like that. And men, grown up men are forbidden to support beard, which is one of the basic identity of Muslim communities. So when all these atrocities are happening, why the Muslim nations and Muslim leadership in those countries, which are democratic countries and where Muslim leaders are in the forefront of championing the Islamic cause, why they are keeping quiet? Nurgul, you and your colleagues must have studied this. Do you have any answer to this?
I must unmute myself first. Oh, okay, I'm unmuted. Yes, indeed, of course. We actually have a quite extensively speak to many Muslim organization. Like when I say organization, civil society, or religious orientated, like religious clerics and imams and religious scholars. What's in common here is we have a quite interesting dynamic. When you look at the Muslim community on those countries, we receive enormous, like overwhelmingly support from the people, whereas the government of those countries decide to keep nice and quiet. Then we sit back and try to work on the background information of the why is that, what's happening here. And there's always something we underestimate. When China, pulled out all this, what that we call the martial arts. It's well planned, well, designed, and also well executed. The base for all of this is economics, economic interaction, economic also connection with all these economically not so well off countries. Unfortunately, there's a lot of countries who's like have a large number of Muslim community as well as is Muslim nations. They economically they try to or tap into that territory, buy into a Chinese the economic and the foreign policy. It is those based on what we call like a Belt and Road is the famous one, and there's a lot of economic interaction happening while the government receiving so much benefit, and the government sees China it's much a better option than uh, the Western world, and because there's so much benefits is coming from them, and it didn't take too long also there's some sideline effect start popping up. Why? Because Belt and Road Initiative is such a huge, um, you know, um, 10 years a project. And in the long run, it is the tool, it is the instrument, it is the roadmap for Chinese economic expansion to those underdeveloped or underprivileged nations and the countries. But recently, I was reading just yesterday, China, because under so much pressure, they still need to the vote and support of those poor African nations, and they decide to waive all the non-interest loan about 27 African nations, which is they gave them originally in a first hand, but they just come up with this huge pressure clash from international community, and they very much and the mindset and the whole motive behind those massive loan is exposed. Now they come up with the brilliant ideas. Oh, we need to like get rid of this loan. You don't have to pay me back, but be mindful there's there's another international stage, big stage just about to happen, which is the voting and the election inside the UN. And it doesn't matter whether it's a poor country or the rich country in UN, one nation, one vote, one country, one vote. So by waiving those, those loan, zero interest loan, China still classifies. But in my research shows it's not zero interest at all. Actually, there's an interest involved. There's all condition involved on these loans. And basically buying the heart and the mind of those nations. And if I look at just in Australia, neighboring countries like Sri Lanka, have a look. Sri Lanka's economy now is completely collapsed. And who's the big loan giver, provider? China. So this situation is happening over again and again, and it's just pretty much it's like injected into all the Muslim countries. So when I look at those cases, I intend to separate the Muslim countries, the government, from the nation. And if you look at the moment, we have this really big UK-based and a support Uyghur, global campaign. It's very much, Muslim communities set it up and made it global. And whenever we need to support, whenever we need to run this campaign, they just step in and are providing support. They also have a regular one campaign once every 3 months. And have a look at the whole rally, what happened in Indonesia and in Bangladesh. And once again, it's Muslim, the community actually rallied around with the religious scholars, religious leaders, and decide to walk up to the street and rally behind us, but not necessarily the government. So that's why the government is very much, once again, playing the political game with the China. And so there's very much what I classify as meat in the sandwich between the Western world and the China. China and the Western world is pretty much competing up against how they engage, who can give a better offer to those government. And be mindful, the majority of those government is they are corrupted, and the China also exporting their governing system to those countries to try to take a control of their own people. And there's more benefit actually coming from China. It's a like-minded. So that's how much I can expand on this question, but there's more to learn, the more to look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurul.
Answer your questions.
Yeah. You know the way you have explained how people of countries are different from the governments of countries. Same thing we are noticing. We have noticed for many years in India also and in other countries. The people, when they stand up, I am more aware of the Tibetan cause. People stand up for the cause of Tibet, but the governments are very shy, and the reasons are, as you said, the governments play the political game, and they are trying to use China's, the freebies or the other gains, and
Mm,
especially when the governments are corrupt, when leaders are corrupt, it's very
mm,
easy for China to operate in those countries. And that is exactly what you gave a very right example of Sri Lanka. This is
mm,
what has happened. But it's heartening to hear from you that in countries like Indonesia, in UK, in
mm.
Bangladesh, people come out in the streets to support the cause of Eastern Turkestan. That's a nice thing to hear. So thank you very much. I
No
have
problem.
one more question. One question for Engebatu Togoshok, Southern Mongolia. Your
Sure.
country has been under occupation for more than 100 years under China. First under the Republic of China, and then the People's Republic, the Communist China. And they have been exploiting your resources. Uh, you know, do you think that this exploitation of resources is an issue which can gain attention of the world, especially when the world is becoming very alert uh, about uh, ethical use of resources, whether those resources are labor or the mind materials, and
Mhm,
both these things have been practiced in southern Mongolia.
mhm.
Would you please explain that?
Sure. The first of all, I would like to make a small correction um, to what you mentioned about the the years under which we are under Chinese occupation. In fact, the Southern Mongolians maintained their self governance up until 1947. Claim that the Southern Mongolia is part of the China, but Mongolians maintain their self governance, including, for example, the movement of um, Prince Demchik Dongro, who declared the independence of Southern Mongolia for during the 1930s and 40s, and um, of course, after the Second World War, after Japan, retreated or from Southern Mongolians again tried to um, restore their independence, and then they actually Southern Mongolia established its own government in 1947, which is 2 years before the establishment of the People's Republic of China. So officially Southern Mongolia is incorporated or annexed to China only after 1949. And so since then, that's why I always mention that at least 7 decade long occupation, yes, which is longer than the occupation of Tibet and the East Turkestan. Yeah, this is something I would like to just mention. And then coming back to your question about the resource extraction, yes, it has been one of the major interests in China and Southern Mongolia, because unfortunately, Southern Mongolia is one of the richest areas in China. For example, we all know the rare earth, which is the very critical ingredients of all high technology product, from like cell phone to space shuttle, all depend on rare earth. I just would like to mention that world's 95% of rare earth is from South Mongolia. There is a one particular mine called Bokt and Bainobo area. That's in the western part of Southern Mongolia. Let me repeat: world's 95% of the rare earth product is from Southern Mongolia. China used rare earth as a leverage to in their diplomacy, and then try to blackmail other countries, and saying, hey, look, we have world's the largest rare earth mine. In fact, it is from southern Mongolia. This is something that I would like to know. Another thing is like, um, China in 2009, China declared that southern Mongolia is China's energy base. And there's a well-known fact that almost like China's one-third of energy is from southern Mongolia. There's a saying in Beijing that if there's four light bulb lighting in Beijing, three of them are from, using the power from southern Mongolia. That's what they say. And so and southern Mongolia's region announced that they found the world's largest uranium deposit in southern Mongolia. And according to Chinese government official website, and the uranium deposit they found can produce 3 million atomic bombs. So that that's one, and then of course China, southern Mongolia, it's China's largest coal producer, largest top coal producer, and one-third of China's natural gas deposits is found in southern Mongolia. So it's yes, the resource extraction is a very, very major big reason why China is really uh, trying to control this area tightly. So other than that, of course, there's some other graphite, and then many other type of mineral resources like titanium. So in order to extract all these resources, what China has to do is first they have to come up with some theory, claiming that, hey, look, these areas, Mongolian areas are very backward. Mongolian way of traditional way of life is very backward. This has to change, and then we have to invest, and then we have to develop this area. And then they just pour into southern Mongolian grassland and destroyed, actually effectively destroyed southern Mongolian ecosystem. They adopted, starting 2001, Chinese government adopted two sets of policies. One is called ecological migration. The Chinese government claimed that the Mongolian people destroyed their grassland ecosystem with their primitive way of nomadic way of life, and that's their claim. And then mm, uh, you know uh, they came up a policy to resettle entire Mongolian nomadic population in rural areas and agricultural areas. And Chinese state council website, publicly put up an article on their website saying that by end of 2015, China would resettle the remaining nomads population of 1.2 million nomadic people in across China. That means by end of 2015, nomadic way of life is officially put to an end. World does not pay any attention to this. This, of course,
Yeah,
includes.
Anibadu, we have one more, when you are talking about this, one issue which is very common, that all your three countries, Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, are very rich
Mhm.
in resources and are being
Yes.
exploited by China. The question is, do you have a common policy among you three exploited nations to reach out to the world and demand that the world should use some levers of
Mhm.
control on China, that they don't misuse this. So we would like to know about that. Are you joining hands to raise this awareness?
It's absolutely, it's a very good idea, and then we have a lot of ideas yeah, to working together. For example, we
Mm,
here in the United States have been very closely working with a lot of Tibetan organizations, and they also mentioned to us that, hey, look, you know, the nomadic people's issue, which is of course like
mm,
Tibets are like almost, the major main part of the Tibet is nomadic people, right? No, nomadic area. So we can come up with some plan or work together to raise this issue to the international communities. Yeah, we did raise this to U.S.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So can I shift to now,
Sorry.
Rinchen Chodon?
Yep.
There is one question about you know that China has been exploiting Tibet for last 70 years, and now the policy they are adopting about the despite all the controls on Tibet, now they are trying to bring in schools, the Communist Party schools, residential schools. Why? What does it reflect? Does it reflect that the the Chinese system failed in winning the hearts of Tibetans, or it's something more than that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the recent kind of policy that they have been implementing, especially like targeting the future generation, I think it's something really threatening and alarming as well. I will give you an example. I think why China is now kind of resorting to such uh, policies or tactics. I think if you look back in history, like not history, but then in 2008, when there was this huge mass uprising uh, all over Tibetan Plateau, we have witnessed and seen that majority of the peaceful protesters, those who participated in that uprising, they were in their early 20s, 30s. There were kids as young as in teenagers, those who have never seen an independent Tibet, those who have never um, seen His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, those who have never, breath like freedom, like air, fresh air in an independent country. Yet those rose up against Chinese Communist government. They came out on streets and they, were vocal enough. And despite knowing the fact that they will face severe consequences and repercussions, and they did eventually later in the coming years, they were all arrested. There were arbitrary detentions, forced detentions, and arrests as well. So this showed that years and years of their efforts in terms of uh, indoctrination, propaganda, trying to input and turn this whole kind of Tibetan younger generation into communist, mindset has been all futile. And now knowing taking from that example, I believe they have now resorted to such dangerous policies of ripping away all taking away all those children and setting up this uh, colonial permanent residential, similar to what residential school were in back in Canada. And so that's why it's really worrying. And we have seen that it's not only happening in Tibet. We have now we have learned that it's also happening in other occupied countries as well.
Thank you. Uh, I have a few questions from the audience. One question is from Manu, who says that we know the entire world governments have been aware of how China is doing, what they are doing in the neighborhoods. Then why the world or neighborhoods are silent? Somebody would like to answer this question? Why the neighbors of China, why they are silent? Yes, Engebatu, please.
Um, Simple. It's money. China is using their money, and China's expanding in influence. starting with economic influence and now then political influence. And we all know that China is bullying their neighbors, especially the small ones, like independent country of Mongolia, Pakistan, and then recently China is even trying to claim that um, the big part of independent country of Tajikistan is their historical territory. That's their claim. So it's simple. It's money and using the economic power to try to take over this country.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to add one point to Manu, the question you asked, is that there is no doubt that the neighboring countries are, they have been watching China occupying Tibet. They have seen China occupying East Turkestan, Tajikistan, and they have been watching China in occupying southern Mongolia, and everybody was keeping quiet. One is the indifference of leadership in those days when this was happening, and second is the later leaderships who were far more well informed because of the information technology and movement of information. Still, those governments have kept quiet, whether it was the government of Nepal, the government of Pakistan has been even colluding with them. The government of India has been very, very indifferent to what happened in Tibet in the very beginning years. They didn't even bother to understand that when China occupies Tibet, then the border with Tibet, which was free from China, where China, there was never China on 4,000 kilometer long border. For thousands of years, there was no China on other side, not even along 1 inch of these Himalayan borders. And still the Indian leadership ignored it. And the result is today China uses Tibet as its base, attacks India, insults India, occupies parts of India, and now the governments are realizing it. I hope it is not too late. So, countries like Nepal, which have been almost functioning like a satellite of China, they have started realizing the threats they are facing as a nation from China. Tajikistan now is facing the threat because when China occupied these countries, when China occupied Tibet, East Turkestan, and southern Mongolia, we should know that it got new neighbors because of that. Pakistan was never neighbor of China. Nepal was never neighbor of China. Bhutan was never neighbor of China. So Tajikistan and all those countries were never neighbors of China, and suddenly China becomes their neighbor, and now they are facing the music. So, but one positive thing is there is always an end to a tyranny. If you go into history, the very recent tyrants like Hitler, till the last day he appeared to be the hero. But when his fortress was started crumbling, there was no Hitler left. In our Indian, if you see our stories of Ramayana, the devils like demons like Ravan, till the last day they remained hero. But when they fell like a log of wood. So China is also going to fall like a wall of wood. Only thing is the countries around China must realize that China has become a threat for them. And luckily, because of the COVID, because of the changing economic situation, because of the Chinese aggressive designs in Sri Lanka, Djibouti, and so many countries, these countries have started realizing that they are losing their own identity, their own sovereignty, their own freedom is in danger. So now so many countries feel threatened. So now let us have some hope that these countries will have some wisdom. Their leadership, even those countries where leadership are abundantly corrupt and sold out to China, let us hope even those countries, their conscience will rise, wake up, and they will stand up to fight for them. And the day these countries start and fight for their own rights, you will see Tibet will be a free country. You will see East Turkestan will be once again a free country. And you will see Southern Mongolia will be once again a free country. the people of Hong Kong will feel relief. The people of Taiwan will feel relief. So I think this is a point to, if you all permit, we can close the discussion on this. Do I have permission from all of you? Yeah, okay. Thank you. So now it comes to uh, Thanksgiving, the vote of thanks. Our friend Gompola, who's the president of Tibetan Youth Congress, was supposed to give this vote of thanks, but because their international conference is going on in Dharamsala and all their entire team is very much busy there, so they asked me to share this responsibility. So I express my thanks to all of you, to Nurgul Sabut for sparing time when it is so late in Australia. Thank you very much for joining us and making such a wonderful contribution. Thank you, Engenbato Togajok, so joining us so early from New York and enlightening our audience with the case of South Mongolia. I have so many comments which I can see online. People did, many of them said that they never knew about what is happening in southern Mongolia, and they feel enlightened. So they are sending thanks to you for informing them. I am very much thankful to Rinzin Chodon, who, as a leader, is quite busy, and she took her time out to prepare for us to make her presentation. So thank you very much, Rinchen Chodan. And I'm thankful to our friend Losang Cheten, who helped us in conducting this whole show as the digital master of this show. So, Losala, thank you very much for being with us, and Tibetan Research Institute, where Losala works. So, our thanks to the institute also. So, thank you very much. It was very enlightening and an interesting discussion. This entire recording will be available on YouTube immediately after we close this show. So all those audience, our friends who would like to see it again, or those who could not attend, will have the freedom to watch it again. So very soon we'll come out with another subject to enlighten our audience on issues related to the Himalayan region, and especially the role of China. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.